back in Seattle. Second time he's been on the podcast, the still worshipful master of University Lodge, third year going, worshipful brother Ben Stagner. Thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
So, I mentioned at the start, right, this is your third year in the East, which does happen, but that is a long time to be in the East, but obviously there was a very, there's a reason for that, right? Everybody's kind of coming out of COVID, and that put a stop on a lot of things. What's it been like as a worshipful master? Because this is something I've been talking to my worshipful master or worshipful masters about. What's that transition been like to go from, COVID and what that was like, and the virtual meetings and trying to keep in touch as much as you could without being able to meet in person, the transition of going from that back to in-person meetings? What's that transition like for you as a worshipful master to lead the lodge?
Well, it's been one heck of a ride. Not to sound like cliche or anything, but it's been a trip. COVID really, I think it really tested us. I think because we go from being shut in, all of a sudden trying to socialize while being shut in, to I think then being able to socialize while having been shut in for quite some time. And I think it's kind of like coming out of your rabbit hole after winter. You're kind of testing out how cold is it, how is it getting back in there. And I think it has not been uneventful, even though we haven't been able to meet. We were able to organize get-togethers through Zoom meetings. We didn't do stated meetings over our Zoom because, of course, we're sharing secrets and all. I think we were just able to just kind of still have get-togethers while not having to worry about the complications of doing a Zoom meeting while withholding and keeping things kosher, so to speak. But I will say a lot of brothers, I think some brothers had a hard time going without being able to see each other, being able to be around each other. I think that took its toll in many ways, and as well as organizing people who were interested still in joining Masonry, how to keep them engaged, how to keep them interested in who we are and wanting to get to know us more while still just being on something like Zoom. So we organized talks. We organized we did an online table lodge, which is a little, for those who don't know, it's a little bit of a celebration type deal, which includes lots of toasts.
Well, I think that's how I met you, right? I think there was an invitation for something that came through my email. I don't know. I think I might have got it through Cameron Bailey. But anyways, it was an invitation to either a table lodge or some type of Masonic ceremony online. And that was the first. Yeah, and it was terrific. I loved attending it, and that really lit a fire under me to try to encourage my lodge to. We used go-to meetings as opposed to Zoom, but to try to take advantage of the virtual space as much as we could during the lockdowns. And yeah, it was terrific, and it really, it definitely lit a fire in me as the secretary to try to encourage my lodge or lodges to, take advantage of the virtual space.
Yeah, the interesting thing is we have a brother who's dove into the history of Masonry very, very extensively, and it turns out this isn't the first time we've dealt with a pandemic. The Spanish flu was a big one, and we found ways to still take care of ourselves then, and we did that to the best of our ability now, but with the added huge benefit of having technology be there for us, like Zoom and FaceTime and stuff like that. I couldn't imagine what Masons went through back then when you couldn't even, if someone had a telephone, or if that was, I forgive my lack of knowledge in history, whether that telephone was even around then. So it was definitely using the best of what we could to try and do that. And some brothers had really good ideas. We definitely were able to check up on our older brothers in case they needed groceries or anything. Luckily, so many brothers were very well taken care of by their other families. But being able to do that was it kept the fire, like you said, it kept the fire going, for sure. But it was still hard on a lot of brothers, because I know, I was very, I could imagine somebody in an apartment building by themselves throughout the pandemic must have been pretty tiresome and pretty taxing emotionally, I'm sure.
I've no doubt. I mean, one thing that has concerned me, it kind of ties into the virtual element of it. We are, both my lodges and I think most lodges in Ontario now are back to meeting in person. But the accounts that we were using to meet virtually, the GoToMeeting accounts, they were purchased kind of for us through our Grand Lodge. And they still exist. They're just kind of sitting there. The links are still available. We still have this, it's the same passwords and passcodes and stuff. And I've been trying to keep up the virtual meetings for Harmony, like the fourth Thursday of the month type of thing. And they have been very, well attended, as well as the in-person, meetings. But I've noticed this habit. I'm not sure if you noticed something similar perhaps in your Masonic journey. A lot of, when it came to the virtual meetings, for example, a lot of Masons, I call it, the one thing Freemasonry, which is they'll say like Freemasonry is X. And that's what it is, right? So they'll say like Freemasonry is in-person social events, but then they won't go to Zoom meetings, or they won't go to business meetings, or they won't do the degree thing, because to them Freemasonry is, and I saw that a lot of people were saying like Freemasonry is in person, it can't exist in the virtual world. And it's like, well, it can be both. It's everything can be equally important. It just depends how it's used. You can't have exclusively virtual, because you can't do ritual virtually, really. You shouldn't. You can't. There's a lot of things you can't do virtually, but there's a lot of things you can do virtually that you can't do in person. Like, I only have so much money to travel out and visit in person, but I can visit Seattle online. It's just how you take advantage of it. I think a lot of Masons, though, get it into their head that Freemasonry is X, and they have a hard time being able to see anything outside of that bubble, and a lot of times to the detriment of the craft.
I would agree with that. I think we've been seeing a lot of that lately. What it means to be a Mason has been something that we've talked with other brothers as well, and I think that's kind of been there for quite a while, and recognizing what that is to each individual. Masonry can be very much a social avenue for some people. Others, it's very much a moral compass, while at the same time being an outlet for a lot of studying and academic aspect of it. Being able to, take something like a Zoom meeting that we've now had plenty of practice with and seeing the benefits of it, I think then it becomes a matter of seeing, okay, how can we incorporate it into our craft if we are so to use it? The same way I'm sure that emails were incorporated into the craft after mail, or that jump of technology. How do you use it? How do you use it to strengthen what we have to do and use it as a tool? I think, it's a great tool for us. For example, for you and I, we never would have met Pat passing around each other, because we were both in two different countries. However, this is a great tool for us to meet this way. But recognizing too, I think some people, we have such a diversity in Masonry that in some cases there's recognition of the differences as well. And in some cases, focusing on the social aspect of it. In one case, focusing on being able to recognize those who want to do a Zoom meeting becomes another thing for us to kind of organize and figure out.
Yeah, I view it as kind of like, well, I mean, I've had this discussion with people where why are you continuing with virtual meetings when you're back to meeting in person? And it's like, well, if there's a brother who's still a member of the lodge but lives in a different province, different country, his only ability to interact with the lodge may be through the virtual meetings. And so there's no reason to stop them. I think it's that old, what's the expression? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. right? If your view of Freemasonry, which works well in your wood shop, right? If your view of Freemasonry is it's exclusively this one thing, you're not going to necessarily see the benefits of other things. But the truth is, there's so much that Freemasonry can be doing, and in some ways, if there was a silver lining to COVID, maybe it kind of forced some people to try some different things they wouldn't have otherwise.
I think COVID has put a lot into light, in the sense of I think we're discovering a lot about ourselves as a fraternity. I think we're discovering, what it means to be a Mason and what makes a Mason. I think more importantly is changing quite a bit. I personally, when I first joined Masonry, there's, how do I to put this delicately? I think Freemasonry has had a certain type of membership that recently has become more diverse, and that means different perspectives, different ideas, different backgrounds, and that I think COVID is, as well as a lot of the recent, and I being fully aware of the two most important rules during a Mason meeting, differences of opinion and perspective have, I believe, caused a lot of division. Luckily, I think that Masonry.
I'm too lazy to edit this out, so everybody can just. Ben Stagner is in his wood shop, so sounds like a power tool of some sort.
Yeah, I forgot to turn off my air compressor. My apologies.
No worries. That's staying in though. I'm not editing it. I can't. I'm too lazy. That's just part of it now. That's part of the interview.
I'm cool with that. Where was I?
Well, the differences of opinion,
perspectives. Yes. It's shown how different we are, and I think handling that has been very much noticeable between Masons who do things differently, and how you would run a lodge or using something like Zoom. I think sometimes there can be a perspective of if it's not broke, don't fix it, or why use something that's new when what we've done in the past has worked out. In some cases, I think it can be great for holding on to the customs and the traditions and the specifics that are in Masonry. But it's also very important to, just like the trade itself, find what tool helps us grow, find what tool helps us, be stronger, be better, be more in tune with using our working tools. And conflict resolution is definitely an important one there when it comes to something like having a conversation about what using something as simple as using Zoom to still connect with brothers.
Well, and conflict resolution, that's, as you kind of alluded to, and I'm seeing it I've seen it, in my lodges and other lodges and traveling around. Like, social media is this really funny thing because, so you're not allowed to talk religion and politics in lodge, but you can leave the lodge and post whatever you want.
And if another,
no, they do. They post whatever they want. If another brother who's a member of your lodge sees it, he can respond, on social media. And then, depending how the conversation goes, there can be some hurt feelings or ill will or whatever it might be that then come into the lodge.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to regulate that. I've heard rumors of Grand Lodge, which I don't know if it's true or not, but our Grand Lodge and other Grand Lodges wanting to try to regulate Masonic speech on the internet. But how do you do that? And what if I'm posting as not a Mason but just as Cameron Adamson? Like, whereas it's very hard to figure out how to actually deal with that in any type of way. The problem is that the hurt feelings may be created online, but they then bleed through into the real world.
I take a little bit of push on that one, and I side a little bit on the side of I've had this discussion a lot, and I think it's very overwhelming to think that my brother isn't going to support me or want to listen to me or see things from my perspective. That's a very daunting thought. And I think especially in this country in particular, I think that holds us back from expressing ourselves for fear of not just retribution or disagreement with what we're saying, but in many cases, maybe this is too strong a word, but hatred in that sense, or really getting some sort of pushback in an extreme form, because we see that outside of our lodge pretty consistently, I feel. But I think that I've been lucky enough, and this is it's funny because it's parallels with being a member of the lodge, but I've lived in 8 different states. I've traveled a lot myself personally, and you see consistencies, I believe, in things like ignorance and prejudice. Something as far as going so far as to say racism, I think I can count on one hand how many true racists I've ever met, but plenty of ignorance and prejudice. That's, when it comes down to it, is pretty easily combated when you know how to disarm that initial thought or that initial reaction that you have to something that's different. And I think the little bit that we've done in our lodge, as well as, being around other brothers, I think has been very, very helpful in restoring a lot of hope in that, because there is a moment of stopping a conversation. And I think being master of a lodge, you find the benefit of being able to stop a conversation and to be able to say, hey, what is our end goal here? Is it to just be right, or is it to grow? And in some cases, that gives it an opportunity for someone to say, you know what, I would like to grow. I'm having a hard time right now. But then it also gives another brother the equal opportunity to say, no, I just want to be right. And I just, regardless of what is being said. And that, more often than not, there needs to just be a pause for a moment to let us breathe. And then to moderate, not moderation, what's the word? Mediation is such an important thing too. And leadership in lodges, I think that's where we really have a moment to shine, which is, how do we handle conversations like that? How do we get down to the core of, this is the benefit of having these rules in lodge, also the benefit of having them outside of lodge, because ultimately the working tools, we don't just use them in lodge. The point is to use them outside. Every human being has a claim upon our kind offices. And when it comes down to a difference of opinion, our kind offices should motivate us to just take a step back and reanalyze the conversation we're having. We hope to come up with something that would help either one of us grow, and if anything, be able to have the great feeling that there is to say, I don't agree with you, I am still your brother. Because I think that's powerful as well.
Yeah, it's a very powerful thing, right? And it's one of those areas where Freemasonry can perhaps be a leader, or is a leader, or should be a leader anyways, in people of different faiths, backgrounds, political views, whatever it may be, working together in a lodge. That brings up that kind of brings up the idea of what is the purpose of a lodge in some ways, right? Or at least the purpose of meeting in a lodge. I've got some flack for this before. I'm not really concerned if people want to be in lodge, so long as they're present. Like, I view lodge as important. Not like I view lodge. I got into this argument with a brother. He's an older brother. I'm a lot older than me. And he was saying, like, I've been to 500 degrees. I don't want to come to the 501st. And I was like, well, it might be your 501st degree, but for the candidate, it's his first and it's his only one, right? And it's not about, you wanting to be there. It's great if you want to be there, but even if you don't want to be there, it's about the candidate's experience, and having you present and having a full lodge room makes the candidate's experience better. And I think and a lot of times Masons will have this idea, and it's that apron charge idea, which I hate. I think it's the most misunderstood charge in all of Freemasonry. But the idea of, like, if I'm sitting in lodge with somebody and I don't like them or I disagree with them politically, I won't enjoy myself. Like, you don't have to enjoy yourself. You can just sit there and not say anything to him. He doesn't have to talk to you if you are like that angry with each other. But if there's a degree or something you need to vote on, or something like a presentation to another brother, like, be there for them. Even if you don't want to do something, do it anyways, because it makes the lodge a better place. You don't have to enjoy the experience. If we do, that's a bonus, and we should try to make it enjoyable. But also, sometimes I get bored in degrees. I've seen so many. I try not to. But sometimes it's not about going to lodge for an enjoyable experience for yourself. It's about making an enjoyable experience for somebody else. And I think that is sometimes lost in that conversation,
I think that, to use the parallels with an actual apprenticeship, I've been in apprenticeship in construction. I've been through an apprenticeship with tattooing. And when you're in it, every new thing is exciting. And you need that direction. You need to be, you're looking to your mentor for the answers for this. And as being the mentee or the mentor, you're seeing things that you've seen over and over and over again. I'm watching an apprentice do a tattoo that I've done many, many, many times, and it's a boring one. But I'm watching, not for myself, but because that's where the opportunity for direction is. Because you still have somebody looking up. If you can't do it, and if you're not motivated to do that, I think the importance of expressing that, is very important, so that we know who's involved and who isn't. And I kind of feel like it's tough to push. It's definitely tough to push someone to want to do something they don't want to do. However, I think it lends the opportunity to do some brainstorming as to, is that because the lodge itself isn't motivating people to show up? Is it the leadership? Is it the camaraderie? And I don't think it's a single one. I think it could be a combination of all of them. Where there's been masters of lodges that run through the lines and do just that. And there's masters of lodges who have great presence. I've seen one that plays guitar while he's up there. We find those ways to want to make it enjoyable. And I think it's a tough one. I think very tough when the numbers aren't quite there, when you have to, deal with the numbers that you have. But I think it's a tough one, because it's very individual basis as well. I think maybe your brother who has that idea, it's understandable, but you would hope that they would, think outside of themselves for the sake of the entering Masons, because that's the only way we're going to grow, is to show people who are interested that this is worth going to. It's not a matter of I've punched my card so many times that I'm done and I'm out of here, or I've made it to the east and I'm done with my lodge. I've taken a break. No, I still want to be a part of that. I've just done my bit as far as sharing my leadership and holding a certain, if you're in the kitchen, I've been sauteing in the pan, and now I'm good with going to the back and cutting vegetables for a little bit. Finding the right roles for brothers based on what they want to do, I think is important as well. But I can definitely understand it being tough when you have a brother who isn't motivated to participate.
Well, and is the lack of motivation coming from and like this kind of goes back to original, or some of the points you were bringing up previously, like is that lack of motivation coming from a desire to just be right? There's a debate in lodge between two brothers, and they just want to be right, and if there's a disagreement and they can't convince the other guy, do they get upset and kind of take their ball and go home? Is there like a motivation coming from lodge is not an enjoyable experience, which I hear a lot of when the conversation invariably comes up, and this, I'm not just speaking about my lodges, this is a conversation I've heard multiple visits and at Grand Lodge and committees and all the rest of it.
Yeah, what you're saying, I've definitely heard as well.
Yeah, it's you know, the lodging's become a more enjoyable experience, and I don't know, it seems so, like, I don't know if I agree with that sentiment anymore, and it seems weird to say because it seems like such an obvious thing, like if you make it fun, they're going to want to attend. I don't know if the goal is to make it enjoyable, I don't know if we can compete with the couch and Netflix. And like,
oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I agree with that.
It's very hard to make it an enjoyable experience, but if we can communicate sufficiently its importance, if not to the individual, then to the world, instead of making it an enjoyable experience, you make it an important experience. And if you make it an important experience, that might be more likely to get them to attend. If you can show them, like, your attendance matters, not just because you'll have a fun time, we hope you do, but if you don't have a fun time, you'll have been part of something that makes the world a better place. And that's kind of where the focus comes from.
Our attendance matters because what we do needs to matter. Whether that be being entertaining, whether it is being a good storyteller, whether it's doing good degree work, or good book work. That, I think that leads into a bigger conversation I think Masonry should have as well. What is our relevancy nowadays? I think, yeah, we'll never be a Netflix, but I don't think that should be our goal. I think our goal is more in line of what have we done before? Why have we been relevant before? Why have we been important before? My very first dinner I was invited to, I got invited to listen to a lecture where one of the brothers was talking about an Italian lodge teaching one of the first kind of public schools and teaching Latin, how that rubbed the church the wrong way because, you know, you're teaching people how to read on their own, how to understand a book that is very important to them on their own. And that was viewed very terrible, but that was for the betterment of us as a whole. And I think right now, especially, that's a very important thing. And I think I'm willing to have this conversation with as many different brothers as I need to, but I definitely feel that Masonry is in a very unique spot right now because I don't think there's been much of a stance being taken on certain things, which maybe we don't need to get specific on which one, but our good works and our membership, we need to at least be able to answer certain things. And by that, I hesitate to get into many specifics. I think being able to support our brethren who are part of the LGBTQ community, that's been a very important one. And I think that's one that is hard for some of the older brothers, for whatever reasons they may have. It's important that our brethren be supported in that way as well. Something as simple as, you know, and this is I don't believe this should be done away with. I just believe this should evolve. But something as simple as, you know, recognizing the women behind Masons has been a pretty traditional thing. However, I don't believe every Mason has a woman as a partner, and being able to adjust for that. How do we show that we're a welcoming and evolving organization? And I think that's a question that needs to have a lot of discussion before. How do we explain the fact that there's Prince Hall Masons and then everybody else? What's the history of that? Why do we still have that? You know, I believe that, you know, there is a long tradition of Prince Hall Masons, and they have their own identity. However, I think they're a product of some indifference, but I believe we've made we've turned that into something very honorable and respectful. But how do we present that to the rest of the world so that the next person who wants to be a Mason can be a Mason wholeheartedly? And with that in mind too, I would just say, I'm going to end that there. I don't know, hopefully remember what I was going to add to that, but yeah, that's been how I felt about, you know, how we present ourselves and going forward.
Well, I mean, and those conversations have to happen. Every every Mason, I think, or every lodge is thinking about, especially the transgendered individuals. You know, some older Masons have their views on that. You know, if somebody identifies as a man, whatever it is, like I'm fine with joining. I'm sure there are trans Masons, transgendered individuals who are Masons. Like those conversations are going to come up more and more, as they should, and we should be as welcoming as we can. You know, and I've seen, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, when you talk about recognizing, you know, wives or girlfriends or stuff like that, like sitting at head tables. You know, I have seen, and I'll never forget it. It was Grandmaster's reception, and it was, you know, at the head table they introduced worshipful brother so and so and his husband so and so. And I remember it was the first time I had ever seen a husband introduced at the head table, right? And it's one of those moments where you go, it's great to see, right? You want to see things like that, because obviously it's a big organization. Our numbers might be dropping, but there's still a lot of Masons out there. And so why aren't there more husbands, you know, at head tables and things like that, right? And those are conversations that are definitely need to have more of, and we need to be as welcoming as we can. I just think that's, and hopefully we continue to be welcoming, you know, even with Prince Hall. That's one of those weird stories where, like, out of something bad comes something really good, in the sense that it was the nature of how Prince Hall started, right? Because Prince Hall wasn't allowed to join. He had to go to the Grand Lodge of England to start his, or Ireland, I believe it was, to start his own lodge. But having seen some of Prince Hall degrees and the mutual recognition, like, it's an amazing organization.
Absolutely.
Right. It's a shame it started the way it did, but it's still wonderful to see that it did start, because it did, you know, it's beautiful degrees, and then you have mutual recognition ceremonies, and you get to visit Prince Hall, and Prince Hall can visit us. And I love stuff like that. You know, it's talking about these things is only, talking about these things can only help the craft grow in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years, you know?
I think what I was going to get, I remembered now, because it's how we have that conversation that makes a huge difference. I think I've seen some brothers who are so supportive of change to the degree that, to the point that to see any sort of indifference causes this, I'm no longer, this doesn't represent what I wanted to, and therefore I'm gonna leave, and make it a snap judgment on that. You know, Masonry, I think in America, and probably in other areas as well, has been a certain type of membership. And to recognize that it's changing is tough on plenty of Masons, typically older ones. But having that conversation about being accepting of new stuff is tough on both sides, I believe, because you've got one perspective trying to change for the better, or just trying to consider a different perspective, and then you have another side that is trying to open another person's mind into growing, because you want to be a part of something that's making change for the better. And when we get pushback on that, which I think happens every single day whenever we talk about differences, is that some brothers are inclined to say, I'm done. I don't want to have to deal with this. Therefore, I'm going to go take my ball and go play elsewhere, to the detriment where we don't have those brothers helping to make the change. I came in full well aware how I might be taking being covered in tattoos, because I know there used to be a much more conservative time where tattoos meant something completely different. Usually it was sailors, criminals, and bikers. Knowing that, I still took my first step into a lodge and talked with brothers who were more than welcoming, and I talked with brothers who were very standoffish. You got to be prepared for that, for the betterment of who it is you're talking to. And in the case of Freemasonry, I personally took the challenge to have those conversations, no matter how backwards they can get or how complicated they can get. knowing full well that you're not going to change everyone's mind. And you will, there may be some brokenheartedness with not seeing someone, listen to what should be a very positive way of looking things or changing one's mind. And that's that. I think that we got to be prepared for that conflict during that conversation.
And I mean, conflict is okay, right? Conflict conflict can be a good thing, right? Conflict creates energy. So long
when we know how to handle it, that's for
yes,
sure.
That's the key. When we know how to handle it, and when we've
been fed a steady diet of, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when we've been fed a steady diet of reality TV show, and us versus them, I think it makes it real hard to say maybe I was wrong. Maybe despite my saying this, maybe I can take it back or explain it and have a conversation where we both meet in the middle. I think that's the hard part.
Well, yeah, it's tough in Canada too. Don't worry, it's tough. It's tough everywhere, and I've talked a lot. Well, and the thing about, I've used the expression and you used it as well, taking your ball and going home. The one thing that especially concerns me about social media, and it's the I don't know if you've heard the expression before, right? The social media manosphere, which is like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, all those guys are kind of self-help gurus that seem to focus specifically on talking to men. I've had Masons even tell me, like, it seems like we're losing Freemasonry. I guess it's not a competition exactly, but a lot of men who would or could join Freemasonry and get something positive about that tend to be more going and finding some type of mentorship. I'm not sure if it's the healthiest type on social media. And I think part of that, and this is the challenge, is it's a very, like, Freemasonry, there's a challenging quality to it, just in the sense that the meetings are a set time, you're there or you're not there. Like, it's the lodge's schedule that you have to work around, and that can be hard if you're working, you got kids, etc., etc. Whereas when it's online, when there's these people online, you can, anytime you want, they're on your schedule. You can listen to them on the way to work. You can schedule them around your life, as opposed to Freemasonry, which is you have to schedule your life a little bit around it. And I think that's where one of the big challenges comes in, is like Freemasonry, it's you actually have to make a commitment to it. Whereas some of these other things that people go to, and it could just be that manosphere, quote unquote, thing, or could be Netflix, it could be anything. Like, so much of life now is on demand. You pick when you watch the movie, you pick when you listen to whoever it is you want to listen to, you pick when you do this or that. And that is also a challenge for Freemasonry, because people might say, I'm just going to take my ball and go home, and when I'm at home, I can listen to what I want when I want. Whereas the lodge is, saying this is the date for the meeting. Like, that's the other thing. How do you compete with that on-demand nature of life now, where there's so much content out there that you can just anytime you want,
Well, I think expressing, very much right from the get-go, when when you're vetting interested candidates, laying down that foundation of what the expectation is definitely important. And I don't doubt that at every, at the beginning, interested candidates are always told our meeting's this time. But I know that the lodges that I've been in, I've seen how quickly people will jump on a petition and hand one out. I mean, that's something I think every lodge has had to have a conversation about, as people are getting more interested in Freemasonry, is you need to, find that balance of quantity versus quality. And I understand that a lot of lodges are struggling to keep their lodges open for lack of membership. But I think something to consider as well is, the amount of lodges versus the amount of members that we have don't fit the same numbers that we had back in World War II. And the size of our family, maybe doesn't need a 5-bedroom house. Maybe the size of our family needs an apartment building for the moment. And driving a little bit is, you know, we need to evolve in some case, figuring out like what we're willing to do to keep our fraternity open, but having a straightforward expectation for you go to these meetings. If you want to be a part of this, this is what's expected, and to really hold that. And if we notice afterwards that we're having a hard time holding, then we reflect as to what we're doing not enough? Did a brother come to want to do more volunteer work and we're not? Did they want to come for more academic knowledge and we're not? Did they come for just socializing and have a few drinks? What is it that we can do while still having an expectation without feeling like we're competing with something like Netflix or entertainment? That we're trying to form an organization of doing good. Essentially, it's good works, whether it be within ourselves or what we do with other people. But that motivation to do good works in whatever form that takes is ultimately the main goal.
And I agree completely. And I'm a big supporter of setting expectations around. I mean, I've taken quite a few lumps, and quite a few Masons are upset with me because I've been arguing about, mandating or having attendance requirements in a lodge, or participation requirements, where you have to attend X number of meetings, per year, whatever that number may be. And that's a whole other kind of, which I don't want to get into because I've had my many fights about that. But, I do think setting expectations is so important. And that's the thing that concerns me most about where some, especially younger men, are like that, again, quote unquote, the manosphere, where it's easy to listen to somebody online on YouTube or whatever say, you just got to hustle harder, bro, and you got to, be a king, and all this kind of catchphrasey stuff. And there's a picture of them in front of a Lamborghini, and all that type of stuff, or going onto a private jet that may or may not be his, that he rented for the day, or like all those kind of showy hustle life type bullshit, which I hate.
Yeah.
But a lot of
it's been betting that for a long time, haven't we? I mean, that's been a part of, whether the gossip circle is online, or whether it's in a knitting circle, metaphorical knitting circle, like that's always been there. I'm sorry to interrupt. No, I agree. It's always been there to a degree, but it seems like it's really like I firmly, like, I'm trying to think of how to describe this. I love the idea, of hard work and caring about stuff. Like, growing up, my favorite, like, I really love, for example, Aaron Sorkin. He's a writer, right? He wrote The West Wing. He wrote Newsnight. He wrote Studio 60, which I think is a very underrated show. And I always really respond to those shows because it's like the people he writes about really care about what they're doing, but in like a real way. Like I feel like if Aaron Sorkin were to write a story about employees at a McDonald's, those employees that'd be the best McDonald's in the world, because those employees would really care. And it's really, it's something I really love, the idea of caring about something. But it seems like, go ahead. I would love to see Rob Lowe in the working the drive-through.
Right? Wouldn't it be wonderful? And he'd be yelling at the manager of McDonald's because he was upset that the fries weren't being done fast enough, and we can do better. Like, you have those inspiring speeches about the need for McNuggets. But there's something so beautiful about that. And I think somehow that idea of like hard work and caring about stuff, it's become corrupted in this weird way where like now it's all like that, this hustle culture bullshit where it's, it's these people on Instagram or Insta famous or whatever it is, I hustle every day, and they take pictures in front of the fancy cars and they do buzzwords like be a king. But it's such a selfish-esque mindset. They don't seem to care about anything beyond themselves and getting the next Twitter follower and stuff. And I feel like we're losing a lot of men to those people. Like because they have this attitude, they counsel young men, and they say things like, I fell down this rabbit hole because I know a few people who've fallen into it, where they'll say things like, I'm a king and I live my life on the edge and I go 24/7. But it's like, you don't do anything. You just watch videos of other people doing things. And it's like, but they'll use all these buzzwords and tell these things, but they don't seem to actually, there's nothing behind it in the way that Freemasonry has things behind it. Freemasons aren't showing up to meetings in Porsches, and they might have a Porsche, but it's not what it's all about. They're showing up to meetings to try to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And I think I worry that somehow we're losing a lot of young men, or I guess with any men, but especially young men, instead of kind of the Masonic type values. It's all this hustle culture stuff that, doesn't seem helpful for society or men or anybody.
I think with any fad, there's what's sold to the masses and what is consumed by them. And I think, that has taken over a lot of people's interest because it is fast and it is easy. Just like McDonald's is fast and it's easy. But I do feel like to continue to use that as an analogy, I think you look at a lot of the shows that are doing like DIY or learning. I have built this entire wood shop off of YouTube and Harbor Freight. And it's with an understanding of seeing somebody create something and be motivated by doing it. As far as something a little more tangible, like you were saying, Aaron Sorkinson, is it Sorkinson or Sorkin?
Sorkin.
Sorkin. Okay. I love West Wing. I grew up loving West Wing. And it definitely brought me what I thought the government, if only it was like that, the world would be different for sure. Looking at different avenues where we're going to find that is important. For example, have you seen, if you're familiar with Ted Lasso?
I've seen a few episodes. I enjoyed it. I got busy. I never actually followed up watching it, but I enjoyed what I saw of it.
I would strongly suggest you follow up and watch a few more episodes, because I think it's taking that same energy while kind of bringing it down to a level that's more almost elementary as far as acknowledging conflict resolution, differences in how our insecurities can sometimes govern what we do or be the first thing that we consider when we make a decision on certain things, and bringing up the most positive outcome in that situation. Every episode I've found I get that same hope like I used to in West Wing, but on a much more emotional level that makes me want to care about the person next to me. I think with any, I think our numbers are we're looking at, I've used this example before. I'm sorry. Where I used to live in Seattle, my friends, I had a lot of friends who were bartenders and other tattoo artists and people in bands. And one group of bartenders and door guys that I knew looked like big metalheads covered in tattoos, long hair, beards. And what they would do once a year was put together sack lunches, get together as many blankets and socks and sweaters as they could, and they would go around Seattle handing those out. I think technically you can't get away with just giving food away because of liability of some sort, or you have to have a permit for it. But that was they were going to do that anyway. They were going to feed people that needed to be fed. They were going to hand blankets to people that needed warmth. And I think, having been to plenty of leadership conferences and talked with older brothers, and having had that conversation about, we need to get vets in, doesn't carry, I think, the same as it did in World War II. And I think what we can look at instead is look at, what makes where is it that we should be looking? And I think part of the counterculture to the mass majority has been maybe being better than what's being put on, that's making people want that fancy lifestyle and to not be considerate of the other person, or that focuses on just being right. It's almost punk or counterculture to be more considerate and to be more well-rounded and in critical thinking as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, caring is the new black, right? Like, that's the thing. I think Freemasonry, when it's done right, it's beautiful to see, right? It's wonderful to see people care about something that isn't going to be of any benefit to themselves. You know, like and I know we always try to emphasize the idea of like Freemasonry is of benefit to everybody, and that's true. Obviously, Freemasonry benefits the world, and Freemasonry benefits its members, but it goes back to the idea of the degree, right? Like, I'm trying to think. I really like Afterlife, that show with Ricky Gervais.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and what was that quote? Right, happiness is so important. It doesn't matter if it's yours or not, right? And that's, I think, a Masonic approach, and going back to the idea of the degree. Even if you're not happy to be there, a brother's happy that you're there, and that should be more important. You know, it's something that is I think in this day and age is a very punk thing, because so much of the emphasis now is how can I be happy, not how can I ensure somebody else is happy.
Maybe that's the key. Maybe that's the answer right there. I just thought of. I mean, the feeling you get. I'm not. I just got through with a pretty big, pretty important to me conflict resolution moment with another brother. We had an incident happen, and in the resolution to that, and having talked something out, and having a brother take a breath, reflect on what it is they said, what their intent was from that, and the emotional pump that you get from having that catharsis, the catharsis you get from having that moment of, I was wrong, I'm not being put through the ringer over it, and I'm now, whether it be forgiven, I am understood, I understand the other person. That feeling carries, and that feeling has massive weight. To focus on fear, to focus on insecurities, that takes, you have to maintain that, you have to justify that. But to want to do good and to be just nice to somebody, it's so much easier. You have to hold your breath to be mad at somebody. And it's such a breath of fresh air when you're feeling good and feeling that. Maybe that's the key that we can try and figure out is, saying I care about you, brother, or saying that despite our differences, I personally have taken it to my oath very seriously to say that I will always be open. I may not always agree, but I will always be open. Just that exercise alone, I think maybe have a lodge. You could do an experiment. Just have 5 different lodges. Just practice that at the end of every meeting. I know that we have specific things we do to communicate that, and this might be where that other older brother was coming from, is, repeating the same thing over and over and over again has the potential to just become a recited line that you just say at the end of the meeting that marks the end of it, as opposed to being the thing that it sends us out. Maybe that's the reflection. Is it what? Sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. But that does bring the question, is there, like, I'm on a bit of a Steve Jobs kick lately, but not just Steve Jobs, some other of that ilk too. I saw an interview where one thing they talked about like, there's 2 types of people. There's mission focused people, and there's, I think, people focused people. I forget. The mission focused people, and they said like Steve Jobs would count as that. Others. What's interesting is, and this is, they tend to score very low on concern for individuals.
Yeah.
Like, they tend not to be that concerned about individuals. And there's the stories of CEOs and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, being douchebags. But they're mean, and they're angry, and they're whatever they are, in service of whatever their mission is. Founding Apple, getting to Mars, who knows what that mission might be. Even if it's a benevolent like a humanitarian mission. There was a story about a CEO of a company that was helping to finance farmers in Africa and, feed hungry people. And he still scored very low on some test of concern for others because he was so mission focused. His entire goal was just the goal. And I do wonder in Freemasonry, like, is there room for lack of a better term, is there room for like an asshole? Is there room for somebody to say the most important thing is the craft and the growth of the craft? But on the other hand, you could say, well, the reason that people would let Steve Jobs yell and scream or whatever at them is because they were, well, it's one of two things, and that's where the tension is. Is it because they were just getting paid to be there and getting paid quite well? So they're going to put up with the Steve Jobs, and they're not going to put up with a worshipful master losing is cool because they don't have to be there in the way you have to be at Apple? Or was it that they bought into the mission of Steve Jobs and they agreed with him that, personal computing was really important, and they were putting up with it not due to the fact that it was their job, but due to the fact that they saw the value in what he was trying to do? And like, where does that tension lead, and how do you find that balance?
I think that's, that's the reason why football teams only they got one quarterback and numerous linemen and different receivers. Recognizing the skill behind that, I think our building association group, we're very fortunate to have a money guy that does that for a living, an architect, and somebody who's been with the lodge for a number of years. Those three people are pillars in our group. And, and one of them, very, very, very black and white will lay out numbers and just say, this is what we can do, this is what we can. You need that kind of opposite end of the spectrum in some cases to get a full, to be able to make a well-rounded decision. But I think in the case of I've read about Steve Jobs, his personality and how he put people through hell. I think there's different explanations for why that is. And I think in some cases, there's one explanation saying that that's just the way that he was built and that was going to happen regardless. But even so, if you're part of a leadership group that can recognize a talent like that and an organizational talent that can produce very well, and you can also recognize the emotional side that needs to be taken care of as well, then that's equally as important, because you got to take care of the people that are making the product are just as important as the people coming up with the idea for it. The trick is finding that balance to make sure everyone is being at least acknowledged.
And I think acknowledgement is a really important thing. I don't know if we do that enough in Freemasonry, taking the time to so it's important that the brother be at the degree. But it's important then that the lodge or the worshipful master or whoever thank the brother for attending the degree. And that's one thing I've noticed. People will thank at the end of a degree, for example, or an installation or a special night, they'll thank, the candidate for coming out, obviously, and for being part. They'll thank the degree team, but they won't take a moment to thank all the brothers in the stands who took the time out of their day to just come and watch, and that's important to acknowledge as well. I think acknowledgement is a really important thing. And with Steve Jobs, he could be a jerk a lot, but he did take time, there are stories of him. He could, maybe not always publicly, but he could acknowledge people if they did good work. And he could be really kind to people at times too. He wasn't always at that level. Right. It's just when he was at that level, it's that balance. That's the key.
Yep. I can understand being in the zone. I get that way in my wood shop when I'm working on something and I need to make cuts, and my fiance comes downstairs, she needs me to take the dogs out. I understand, and you get that when you're in the zone. But yeah, that I think okay, I went off on this one. Still finding that balance is the important part. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and that zone is, I think that's just something when you're passionate about something, that's what you experience, right? When you care about something enough, it's easy to get very emotional about it. And it's just how that emotion is harnessed. Is it harnessed to try to push things forward in a positive direction, or is it just to make people feel that? And how do you find, hopefully you can harness it in a positive way to accomplish the goal, right? I think that's the key.
Well, without letting your ego get in the way, because I know, I work in the tattoo industry. I see a lot of people's talent be so tied to their ego that the importance of the talent goes beyond what you're doing, or what the reason you're doing it in the first place. You get to make a living doing tattoos for people. That's a privilege. That's a privilege to be able to do art and make a living off of it. But when you start thinking that you're God's gift to people's skin because of your talent, then you're losing sight, and then people will pay for it when that doesn't make for good leadership, because you're the center of it, and you're not acknowledging the bigger picture outside of yourself.
That is very true, and it definitely is a privilege to be a tattoo artist, and it's a privilege to be a Mason, and it's my privilege to have gotten to meet you. Again, it was a shame, I guess, the circumstances, getting to meet you during the pandemic through Zoom, and having attended a few meetings at University Lodge virtually, and I really want to do it in person someday soon. So thank you so much for being back on the podcast. It was much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.